I had two really good buddies in high school. We were kind of a trio. Usually, at least the three of us, if not two of us, would get together on a Friday or Saturday night, hang out, drove to school together, hung out in the halls. We were a pretty thick group. One of those guys was Jeff. Jeff grew up not too far away from me. We went to elementary school together, junior high school together. And Jeff had a house with a single garage stall. And behind that door, and under a drop cloth, was a pristine 1963 Corvette convertible in red. In fact, we have a picture of it. That's not the one, but that is what it looked like. I mean, it was a gorgeous car. Now, this is Minnesota, so this was a car that you drove for like 3 weeks a year. 3 months a year, really. But on those beautiful summer nights when I would be hanging out at Jeff's house, one of the things that his dad would do he'd say to his wife, "Patty, let's take the vet out." And they would just cruise. They'd just cruise, wave at people, drive a little too slow, but everybody admired this beautiful car that was in perfect condition. When we were in our senior year in high school, at homecoming, Jeff's dad said to Jeff, "Hey, you want to take the vet to pick up your date? Take her to dinner, take her to the dance in the convertible." And Jeff said, "No thanks." When it came to prom, the same offer was extended by Jeff's dad. "You want to take the vet? It'd be really great. It's a beautiful night." Jeff said, "Nah, Dad, I don't really want to drive the vet." Now, I heard his offer. It's like, "Jeff, dude, you got to do this." I said, "I know you know how to drive a stick. Like, you can do this. Take the vet. It would be so cool. Think of the pictures. You could drive her on the lakes before you take her out to dinner." No, I don't want to do it. It's like my dad's fourth kid. Like I don't want to do it. I don't want that kind of pressure. And his dad came up to me during pictures that night and he said, "See if you can get Jeffy to take the vet. I would love for him to do that." And I said, "He's nervous about it." He said, "I know, but he can do it. He's 18. He knows how to drive. He could do it. I really would like. It would mean a lot to me if this car that I have kept perfect would be used for special events, and he would enjoy this car and experience the joy of driving it like I have." And I said, "I'll mention it to him." And I said, "Hey, your dad really wants you to do that. He's not just saying that. He really wants you to do it." "I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it." He did drive the Corvette a few times with his dad riding in the passenger seat. But it made him so nervous to do it that he really experienced no enjoyment in it whatsoever. I asked Jeff about the Corvette a few years ago. His parents had downsized and moved into a condo. He said, "Yeah, Dad sold the vet." And I can't help but think that if Jeff would have said yes a few more times and had driven that car, that Jeff would be the one to receive that car one day as it was passed down to the next generation. And now, who knows what happened to the car. Stephen read that parable. And this is our parable series now that we're in for another few weeks. Looking at parables that are harder to understand, kind of obscure, maybe only referenced in one of the Gospels, or in this case, it's mentioned in two different Gospels, but it kind of has this troubling ending, right? Story of the three slaves, or the three servants, that are given 5, 3, and 1 talent, respectively, by the master of the house. Now, for perspective here, 1 talent, I understand, in doing some biblical research on this, is equivalent to, get this, 15 years' salary. So the third guy, the one that got 1 talent, was given the equivalent of 15 years of a regular, kind of a standard salary, and told, I am putting this in your care. I want you to be wise with it. And I want to ask you about it when I come back sometime from now and inquire about what you have done with this talent. So we don't know some of the things, like why the one guy got 5 of those, and why the second guy got 3 talents, and why the third got 1. But even for the one, think of, first of all, there's great, like, extravagant wealth, clearly, in this household. But even the one, he wasn't given, like, here's $10, go turn it into 20. I mean, he was given 15 years worth of wages. And so I think part of what's lost in translation over time is that we're talking about still a sizable sum of money. So it's not take it or leave it, you could do something with it, you could sit on it, whatever, hide it under your mattress. No, this is a significant amount of money. And what they were going to do, what they were asked to do, and we sort of get a glimpse into this as the story continues to evolve, is that they are supposed to go to the bankers, or they are supposed to go into the marketplace, and they are supposed to invest in other people, right? Lend your money to someone else in terms of who has a good venture going, and then we'll maybe turn that money into more money when that loan is repaid, right? It's returned with interest. And so that's what's going on in this story. I think sometimes we think biblical times are so far removed that they're talking about small quantities of money, and it's like loan it to a friend or something. No, this is, even in Jesus' time, they didn't have a stock market, of course, but they did have things like you could go and invest in other people, or there were people that did that kind of banking investment. And so he is saying, I am going to see what you do with this thing that I have entrusted you with. And so, as you heard, that the 3 servants, they come back with varying degrees of response to this. The first one doubles the money. He turns 5 into 10. The next one turns 3 into 6. And the last one, he comes back and he says, what did you do with my money? I buried it. You what? I buried it. I know how much you value what you have, and I was scared that if I messed with it, I could screw it up. I could lose that money. And I am thinking that you would be happier just getting your 15 years of salary back rather than me returning to you a portion of that because I lost in my investment. And then we get to the hardest part of the story, where the master has what seems like a really strong response. You are wicked and you are lazy for doing what you have done. Now, it seems still like a particularly kind of harsh response, I think, to some of us. But also, when you think about, if I entrust you with 15 years, I have a financial planner with whom I do not have a great deal of money invested, but I do expect him to do something with the money that I've asked him to invest. Win some, lose some, I understand, that's part of the deal. But sit on it, bury it, put it in a coffee can? No. Unacceptable. That's not what your job is. But this third servant takes the position of, it's better to just give it back than to risk anything. I get that. I get that way of thinking. I understand that. And I understand why Jeff did what Jeff did. But as I've gotten older, I also appreciate more of why Jeff's dad wanted for his son what he did. And I understand that we have the same kind of propensity in our lives to respond in this kind of a way. For many of us, when we think about our faith or we think about the church has taken on a role that has brought us to a place of safety, right? I know, and we talk about this a lot, but I know that for many of you, part of your story is that when you have found yourself eventually here at Grace, that this church represented the kind of community that felt like a safe place for many of you, or it felt like a safe harbor, a refuge, a sanctuary from an experience that you had, or a faith that you were brought up in that no longer feels like it's appropriate for you, or one that you have outgrown or moved past in some ways. And that's great. And for others of us, we have come to find our greatest times of faith and growth of faith or appreciation for the church when we found that safety or that sanctuary or that comfort or that support or that sense of community. And all of that's great. And look, when the storms of life rage, it is nice to have the cover of a garage. But when the sun comes back out, the vet's got to come out. And so what happens is a lot of us look at our faith as something that is comforting, brings us peace, brings us a sense of feeling known and safety, and all of that's great, but it can't stay there. Because what Jesus is teaching in this parable is that when the sun comes out, you got to take the risk. You got to take the risk. Now, for some of us, the challenge is what I've just described. It's that emotional thing. It's the weariness. It's the complicated backstory. And that's where we found safety. For others of us, the ones who tend to be very risk averse, the one who like familiarity, the one who likes tradition, the one who likes just to press repeat as much as possible in our faith, well, that's where this parable should rub us a little bit, right? That's what I'm talking now about those of us who say, I don't like change, I don't like to be pushed, I don't like to be prodded in any kind of way, I don't like to be stretched, I don't like to read books that challenge me a little bit. And I think that we roll our eyes and say, nobody's like that, but we are like that. We are like that. We receive new ideas or different perspectives or alternate voices as a threat instead of an opportunity to grow. Look, not every sermon that I preach is going to be one that lands with you, and sometimes you're going to say, gosh, I didn't like that, or I disagreed with that, or shoot, I might have been offended by that. And that's okay. That comes with the territory. And I've got to remember that as a risk-averse person myself. But it doesn't necessarily need to be received as a threat, right? Your small group decides to read an author, and that author is more conservative or more progressive than you find yourself. And the first tendency is to say, I want to reject that, or I want to push that away, or that feels like something that is going to corrupt my theological sensibilities. But what if instead it was, no, this is an opportunity to be challenged, to be stretched, to hear a different perspective. It doesn't mean I need to adopt it or take it on. It just means it's a challenge. And so those are the kinds of things that we run into when we want to seek that safety and the comfort of the familiarity. And so maybe this parable is about us taking that little risk. But I think that what Jesus is saying here is that we need to be people as Christians that once the storm that we have suffered through is passing, it's time for us to become a little bit more acquainted with courage, taking a little bit more of a risk. I spent with Karen Paul, our lay leader, and Stephen Ingram and Amanda Vernon and we all attended the North Alabama Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church the past 3 days. It's a wonderful conference. Fantastic. And the most meaningful part for me was on Thursday night we had the ordination service, which is the service where we install and the bishop lays hands on the pastors who are now going to be ordained as United Methodist clergy. And there were only 3 of them this year. Now, the class behind them coming in, that was a sizable group. But this was a class of 3. And as I sat there and I looked about them and I was praying for them and I was thinking about each one of them and their experience, it occurred to me that these are the people who, for at least 2 out of the 3, were in college during the hybrid, social isolation, button-down COVID years. They graduated just in time for the largest schism that we have ever seen in the United Methodist Church. Many of them experienced stories or their home congregations being torn in two. It might even be that for at least one of them, that the church that raised them up no longer exists or is at least no longer a United Methodist Church. And yet, they said, I feel God calling me to this vocation of ministry. And I think the unbelievable courage to step out and say, I know where we have been, and I'm still going to move ahead with this, speaks to a depth of their faith and the courage that they have. It reminded me, as I was reminded over and over again as we heard from mission reports and ministry with the poor and people doing ministry with diverse groups and people that are working for reconciliation and peace and justice and all of this, I was reminded that to be a Christian is to embrace courageously the unknown. And it is to not let fear dominate the conversation or our decision making. Because it is too easy to stay in the garage. It is too easy to stay in the comfort and the safety of the familiar and to not branch out. Being a Christian means acting boldly, and it does mean that fear does not have the final word. And when we have the chance, what many of us tend to do is bury or squander those things in a hole that God has given us to use. But I remind you that the time that Jesus was buried, he rolled the stone away. Because the tomb is not where he stayed. But resurrection compelled him to go forward and to re-engage with the community once again. He did not know the world that he was going back into when the stone was rolled away, but he, in spite of that uncertainty and in spite of the dangers that were outside of that door, he went out anyway. Why does Jesus come down so harshly in this parable on the condemnation of the third slave? Because this slave was entrusted with the greatest gift that he could imagine, and he did nothing with it. And Jesus would rather have us risk and fail than to bury our talents. This gospel reading, this parable, this telling of the parable appears in Matthew's gospel. And I want to remind you how Matthew's gospel ends. Matthew has this desire to portray Jesus' teachings in a particular way. And the thing that he goes back to time and time again is, what kind of a world, what kind of a kingdom are you building? What kind of a disciple are you being in the world around you? And are you doing what Jesus wants us to do? And so he highlights parables like this one, which he spends a fair amount of verses telling that story, but it's also telling because it ends in the same way. Here is how Matthew's gospel ends. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, and some doubted. And Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age. The Great Commission. It's a sending. It's a saying, do not bury the talents, but take boldly and go and proclaim and share and teach and serve in my name. When the storm is past, it's time to back the vet out of the garage. May we go and do the same in our lives as Christians. Will you pray with me?